Hey, hi. Welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the original podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner. I'm a programmer at TIFF now, and this is the other thing I do. My guests this week are the Paz brothers, Yoav and Doron, who've written and directed the Israeli horror films The Golem and Jerusalem. Their new film, Plan A, opens the Toronto Jewish Film Festival this Thursday, June 9th at 8 p.m. at the Hot Docs Ted Rogers Cinema. Based on a true story, it's a thriller starring August Diehl as a shattered Holocaust survivor who falls in with a group of fellow Jews after the end of World War II, plotting to kill 6 million Germans in an act of revenge. Yoav and Doron chose Inception, Christopher Nolan's head-spinning 2010 action film, or maybe it's a heist picture, starring Leonardo DiCaprio as Cobb, a man who specializes in a very precise type of corporate espionage, orchestrating elaborate infiltrations of his targets' minds. It's the perfect narrative engine for Nolan's love of clockwork plots and parallel tracks of action and reaction, with an all-star cast that includes Elliot Page, Tom Hardy, Marion Cotillard, Ken Watanabe, Dilip Rao, Cillian Murphy, Pete Postlethwaite, Michael Caine, of course, and Joseph Gordon-Levitt as an action hero. It's complicated, it's dizzying, and it's kind of a blast, especially if you see it on a really big screen. This is Someone Else's Movie.
Yoav, should I start or you?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Go ahead. No.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think Inception for us, for me at least, is the reason cinema is still made for, especially to see this, to watch this movie on a big screen, and to have the whole shebang, the music, everything is to. I mean, for me, I felt that everything in this movie is up to 11, but in a good way. I mean, everything was so precise, and the dream within dream within dream, the plot device that Nolan had there, that was so unique for us, that layers and layers of stories, and it was mind blowing to see such an intelligent movie and such a blockbuster movie. Because and I think that's what made him so successful. Obviously, I mean, it's kitschy and it's emotional and it's not crowd pleasing, but it also very, very intelligent and always makes you think. That's why I loved it so much. In general,
cinema has been around for so long, and we thought we've seen it all, and then Nolan pushed the envelope, and he successfully was able to tell a story in a new way, in a much more complicated way. And I think it's more like Inception is more like you design sound, because usually video has only one layer, but sound is, when you go to sound design, we love this process, because usually you edit the film and it's only like one layer of film, and then you go to the sound design, and then there's endless ways to adding more and more channels and to tell small little stories that add more to the world that you're creating. But Nolan here in Inception, he was able to build 3 layers of video, 3 layers of storytelling, and was really mind-blowing to see it for the first time.
Yeah, it is. I mean, now, 12 years later, where everyone just assumes that Christopher Nolan's films are going to be the biggest and most complex things at any time, in any given moment when they come out, it is kind of remarkable to roll back and think about, this is right after The Dark Knight. Warner said, okay, do whatever the hell you want. And he really went for it. It's, it started, the story goes that he had started it as a treatment. It was like an 80-page treatment about a heist kind of thing with like dream stealing, where that was the point. They weren't putting it in, they were taking something out. And it just kept getting bigger. And so he realized it didn't work as a heist picture. I think I did the Dark Knight junket in 2008, and he had no idea what he was going to make next, or at least that was what he kept saying. He says he never knows. When he finishes his movie, he's finished forever. He thinks he'll never work again. And this is like every movie, it's part of his self-mythologizing, I think. Like every movie takes it all out of him. I mean, he was saying it when he made Memento too in 2000. So I don't know that he really believes it, but it's a good line. Mm-hmm. And then this turns out to have been just percolating, excuse me, in the back of his head for years, going through all these different permutations. And then what came out is, I mean, it's 17 different films. It's every story at every speed. It's a Bond movie for about 20 minutes. It's a heist. It is sort of a heist picture. It's an action film. It's a thriller. It's a meditation on what we need from our parents that we never get.
Mhm.
And somehow it's consistent. That's the thing that amazes me. The one sort of, it's got all of his strengths as a filmmaker and very, very few of his weaknesses. The propulsive thing he does, where he can make you feel as though you're being dragged along while you're sitting still by the narrative. It's what lets him have the incredible endings of every one of his movies, which are never fully endings. They're just sort of stop points, but you feel like you're hurtling into the credits. And this gives you that for 2.5 hours straight. Like it somehow doesn't stop, even though it's all exposition. It's incredible. Like it's a textbook case of how not to write a screenplay if you can't deliver.
Yeah, I totally agree. And there's always a feeling that you're missing something. This is why you're on the edge of the seat, because you're always trying to understand what's going on, what's going to be next. You're diving into a new world, and that's, I think I had the same feeling when I saw Matrix 1. It's the same feeling that it's so rare these days to have in cinema.
When you first saw The Matrix, it's the sense of endless possibility, right? That this thing could be anything it wants to be at any minute.
Exactly. No, that there's new rules.
Exactly, the rules.
New rules.
You need like half an hour into the movie. You just need to keep inside your head to know the rules. By the way, he did the same in Interstellar. Like Interstellar also, it's like a physics lesson in the beginning. It's like you sit down. I watched the movie with my wife, and she just went out of the theater because she doesn't like physics and she's not into that. And it was so overblown from this beginning in Interstellar. She just went out, and I stayed there. But it takes a lot from the audience. He's giving so much credit to the audience in both movies, in all of his movies, maybe. So you need to know the rules, and you learn, and that's what pulls you into this new world. And once you know the rules, everything can happen. Like you're a sucker. You can do like he can write whatever he wants, and you're in.
I do think it's fascinating that he leaves so much unspoken emotionally, but it's all conveyed by the actors anyway, somehow. Like the stuff that DiCaprio is doing with regret and sadness in every shot. All we know is that he doesn't see his kids. Like that's really the only thing we know about Cobb. But by having Marion Cotillard show up and try to kill him over and over again, and by explaining to us that this is the physical expression of his regret inside the dream, it tells you everything. It's so simple to connect to it. I mean, it is, again, it's Nolan's problem with writing women who are always either absent or dead. But here it's a strength. Here it actually works because Cotillard commits to it so much, and DiCaprio, the second he sees her, he starts to flee, and it's this great larger thing where afterwards, like, oh, it's like he's running away from his responsibility. Nice. It's just there. But yeah, as you say, it makes you feel smart for following it. I think that's one of the reasons he's built such a rabid fan base, is that they're receiving messages. They're being told, they're being congratulated for solving the codes of films.
Yeah.
Right. Which now is what all cinema culture seems to be on Twitter.
Yeah.
This is not a good thing.
We agree.
Yeah. But to have that moment of discovery is exhilarating. And to figure out, I mean, the moments where Elliot Page's character is introduced and is the builder who has still somehow no idea what's going on, and everything has to be explained.
The fun and games part with the streets folding. You mean that's
yeah.
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 So in a way, it's such a Hollywoodic beat. It's such a fun and games kind of superhero. You've seen it so many times, but again, in a Nolan movie, it works so uniquely. I mean, it's so refreshing to see it. Though we've seen this thing when someone's explaining the other ones the rules. This is very The Matrix, by the way. When Morpheus explains Neo the rules, it's exactly like DiCaprio is explaining Page.
Yeah, and it's fascinating to watch play out in the same way as The Matrix, because you are taking a moment where there's nothing going on but the film teaching you how the film works. And,
exactly.
And you get the sense that you're seeing something new, but in this case, we actually are. Those folding effects are amazing, and they hold up, which really surprised me. I was worried that they would be a little, little jaggy these days, but it holds up. It's clean in a way that I mean, obviously, Doctor Strange went and ran with it for the Marvel universe of folding things. But when the difference, I think, here is that it's presented in such an almost literary way. It's stately. It's serious. These things start happening just outside the periphery of the screen, and we're kind of dragged to that. Our eyes are pulled to them as they're starting to turn. And again, the actors just nonchalantly exist through all of it. You know, like Ariadne's showing off. It's not. Right. It's not exactly. It's not exactly new to them, but we get to experience it from the outside and the inside at the same time. And again, he's showing you. It's like a heist movie. He's showing you how everything works before it's deployed, and you can just be dazzled. You can enjoy watching the actors play inside these worlds because he's given us the breathing space for that. But yeah, we can be dazzled by what's going on. Totally. In the sense that this is something totally different and new.
Right. What year is the movie? It's 2010. So and just the thing I thought to another amazing point that I thought about recently is I wasn't a father at that year. We weren't parents. And I think only when you're a father, and I watched the movie again, or became a father, and I watched the movie again, and I realized the punishment that the character has, that the protagonist is not seeing his children's face. You can't see you can never see the face. That's the most, such a horrible curse, not to see your children. You can see their children. He sees them running in the court. I don't remember the scenes exactly, but you see them running, but you can't see the face. And that's such a horrible thing to do. It's a horrible torture for a character.
Yeah, it's very
Interstellar,
clever.
it was even worse, of course. Like that you're so far away.
Tear squeezer, yeah.
And she's growing up without you being there. So yeah.
I don't know that he means it to be cruel, right? I think that he's just seeing a plot point that is very moving and powerful. But yeah, you're right. The longer you spend with his movies, the harder they are on relationships, the darker they become. Like Tenet just isolates people so completely from the world they're in as a matter of course, but it's also a story about a woman who's been utterly betrayed by her husband, who never really loved her, and she has to come to terms with this and also almost die in the course of it, and she's not even the center character.
Right.
Yeah, he's hard on women and kids. And but these are like it's amazing because nobody ever gives Kubrick a hard time for his utter disdain for humanity. Like he's a total misanthrope as a filmmaker, and Nolan is constantly compared to him, but also he gets flack for the coldness of his films in a way that I don't think Kubrick did, just because, I mean, it's all social media amplification, right? Like there's just louder voices now on the outside than there used to be. But watching Nolan find emotion in these films the way he does, I think he just processes it differently, and what scares him as a person, as a husband or a father, is different from what scares most people in the audience. Isolation and loneliness is such a constant theme in all of his films, to the point where like the only one that isn't is Dunkirk, I think, where it's about a collective effort,
but
it's also the one that's least interested in character, and I love it. I do think I think it's his best film.
It's an amazing movie. But you're right that there's not a lot of character. I mean, the characters are there, of course, but it's not like it's an ensemble piece.
It's
like
not
right,
about the
right.
Yeah. There's hardly time for dialogue. It's all functional. I think it's incredible because he's finally made the mechanical movie that everyone accused him of making all along, but it's exquisite to watch the pieces function, and everybody in it has high stakes and complete reason for being in the situation they're in. I love it. It's a great ride. And Inception is one of those films where if you step out of it for a second, it's all very silly. Like if you tried to explain it as God knows I did, if you tried to explain it to people who haven't seen it yet, it's like, well, that's dumb.
Right.
It's like, not
it's really with it. It's really,
And then you're stuck in you're stuck in your dream,
and then you need to wake up. You need to kick the chair, and he falls back, and that's how you wake up.
I know. If you see it play out, it makes much more sense than if you try to describe it. I guess it's the same for Tenet. And I suppose if you try discussing any Batman movie, it is kind of silly. But he does have the gift of propulsion. He will drag you through these things, whether you believe it or not. And then you get to watch, Tom Hardy and Joseph Gordon-Levitt be dressed in exquisite suits, just being goofy in the backgrounds.
Yeah.
And it makes it all okay.
Yeah. Amazing. And technically also, sound design, music, of course, Hans Zimmer, all the track, the score is, every time I hear the last track, like the elevator scene at the end, Heartbreak is such a powerful track. So yeah, it's a perfect movie for us. It's one of the best movies in the recent years, I think.
And yeah, so I'm just trying to figure it out. I always want to work back to when people saw something, but this is fresh enough that you would have just seen it in the course of going to movies, right? I mean, it was just playing.
Right.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Went to the movies, and there was the big buzz around it, of course. And yeah.
But these are really rare moments, like we said, that you're sitting in a cinema and then you realize that you're watching something really truly fresh and truly new, and a whole new way for storytelling. And this is so rare because it's so difficult. Everything that we watch or you're trying to create always reminds you something else, and everything is based on something. And it's becoming more and more difficult to tell a story in a new way. And somehow we succeed doing it time after time.
No, let's hope to feel the same on Saturday when we're going to watch Top Gun 2. We're going to watch it in a few days.
I see.
I'm kidding. I don't know what the reaction will be, but I'm really excited about this movie.
People are pretty high on it here. I haven't seen it yet, but it's opening. It will have opened by the time this runs, so people will have opinions. I'm kind of fascinated by the response that people are getting to it. That the early reviews that have rolled out have been rapturous.
Right.
It's got a very low bar to clear, which I think is interesting. But the way people have responded to it has been really quite surprising.
Yeah. Right.
But you're looking forward to it.
Yeah, us as well.
Hey, it's Norm, interrupting my own show to tell you about my new Shiny Things newsletter, a weekly dispatch about physical media, popular culture, and maybe even the odd streaming thing. This week I broke my own rules in a bunch of different directions to write about David Cronenberg's Crimes of the Future, because it's really good. I also covered Arrow Films' new special edition of Wild Things and Sony's 4K steelbooks of The Bridge Over the River Kwai and Lawrence of Arabia because, obviously. Subscribe for the price of a latte at shiny-things.ghost.io or find a link at the Semcast Twitter account. I'm writing about movies again. Come check it out.
For theater, to sit in a movie, to watch a big scale movie, just the action scenes are. I'm quite sure. I don't know how the script is. I'm quite sure the action scenes are going to be amazing, and the shots and the dog fights and everything.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Let's see.
And that is the promise of Inception too. Like, it is a big screen spectacle. It does not work as well on DVD where you're watching it, or even Blu-ray where you're watching it compressed down to a sliver. The widescreen kind of works against it on a smaller scale. I think I've seen all of his films in IMAX screening rooms since The Dark Knight. All of them have been press screened. I mean, he makes a point of screening them in large format on film whenever possible for us, just to go out and say, oh, you really need to see this in large format in IMAX. Because of course you do. I mean, it's the nature of movie going now that everybody's been stuck at home for 2 years watching stuff on television. Of course you're going to be encouraging people to see the biggest version possible. But with Nolan, he uses the space. Like, it's not an exaggeration.
Yeah, totally.
He's been this passionate proponent of cinema, celluloid, film restoration, all of it. He like Warner Brothers let him play with the restored prints of 2001 to create his own idealized version for IMAX presentation.
Oh, really?
I mean, it's nuts in a way. It's incredibly indulgent of the studio, and also, they're stitching him together with Kubrick in a way that was never really possible before. But it just feels like a way of keeping him interested and keeping, keep dangling things in front of him so he'll play with them between movies and he won't wander off. I mean, I know his next film is being produced for Universal, I think.
Oh, really? Because
of some fallout around the release of Tenet, where he was driving. I mean, there are conflicting stories, and I still don't know what the truth is, because it's all very silly. But he was supposedly behind the push to get Tenet open in theaters in the summer of 2020, which cost hundreds of millions of dollars in worldwide release. It didn't make anywhere near what everyone expected it to because of COVID. In Ontario, we couldn't see it until the last week of August, I think, because that's when theaters were possible. The first slow reopening was in late summer, and they had us come down to the IMAX theater at Ontario Place and screen it there in the world's largest IMAX screen, and it was very impressive. But you just could not get people to come and see a movie in the summer of 2020. So Warner was very quick to say that Nolan was the one pushing for a theatrical release instead of waiting. Whereas, with Top Gun Maverick, with Top Gun, Cruise is the one who's claiming that he was never going to let it happen to streaming. And he sat on it for 2 years and made sure that the fans could see it in the right way and all of that. That's, now it plays out and it's going to make $1 billion. But,
and they waited for like 2 years, right? It's crazy.
I mean, it was done before COVID.
But it seems it was the right move.
Right.
Yeah. Well, now in retrospect, right, it feels like it was. Yeah. I think Tenet would still have been a complicated sell no matter what, but I'm sure it would have had a huge couple of months as the big dog in an IMAX, large format presentation. If that was occupying the space theatrically for an entire summer of a normal summer, it would have been massive.
Right.
And instead, it didn't quite work. Although the film is the film, right? Like that's always the weird thing. It's just because you release something into a devastated landscape doesn't mean the movie is any less good or less timely. I guess it's hard to explain.
We can only Yoav can only take comfort in the fact that COVID disrupted Nolan's career and not just ours. The success of Plan A was we also, of course, like all movies, it was very hard to screen it during COVID. So us and Nolan are probably on the same boat, which is nice.
Yeah, well, we can talk about that. How the film was finished before the pandemic, you had said. So
the shooting.
The shooting was finished before. We were lucky enough to finish the shooting before. Now we're talking about Plan A, and the downside of it was that we did the post-production. All the post-production process was during COVID, the peak of COVID, when nobody knew anything about the pandemic and everything, and it was a very rough ride. Because it's a co-production, Israel and Germany, and there's obviously there's a lot of people involved, and the editing was here, and the sound design was there, and it was a very rough time. I remember when they just opened the editing studios after, at the beginning it was a total lockdown, of course, all the world, the peak of the COVID, February, I think, beginning of March, everything was really, all the world just stopped. And then slowly we opened the editing rooms and we started moving back in. We finished the movie. We wrapped the movie during the pandemic.
Good.
So in a way, we were lucky.
I remember horror stories. A friend of mine made a film about the pandemic during the pandemic and had to do the whole thing remotely. Interviews. It was a documentary, but interviews, post, all of it had to be done in individual spaces. The thing came out in the fall of just like the October, November 2020. It was a remarkable accomplishment, but it damn near killed him. And the sense of building something collectively in isolation. I mean, if you can't direct, looping sessions in the same space, you'd have to figure all. And you guys were doing this as we were figuring it out, not after, a year later when we've all accustomed, we've acclimatized to Zoom and all.
Exactly. But we were lucky just before locking down the film to travel to Germany. And then we were able to finally sit together with the sound designer and with the grading and everything. And finally, after a long process, we closed it the way we wanted it to be. And we are very proud of the result. And now it's starting to do his first steps in the state and in Canada. And we are very curious to see how people are going to react to the film.
I'm curious too to see how it fits with stuff like the Golem and Jerusalem, because you've made all these movies about sort of founding mythologies, about biblical texts and the things that are fundamental sounds wrong because they're so fantastical, but they're stories about the stories that we tell each other, the mythology that sustains people. And now you have a post-Holocaust drama which ties into the founding of Israel, which is a fundamental foundational myth, right? Like it's become a myth now after 7 years. And we're in a place now where stories of Jewish revenge, like Spielberg did it with Munich almost 20 years ago, and that was taken badly. It was received as something that he, like maybe transgressive, a story that shouldn't be told. The idea that the oppressed can become, not the oppressed, the victimized people can become victimizers themselves. There's something really ugly and alive inside of Plan A in that story. And, we were talking about Nolan being such a cold filmmaker. This movie makes no illusions about the pain and the grief that drives literally every character we follow.
That's what we liked about this story. I mean, we never imagined ourselves telling a Holocaust story, not because there's so many amazing Holocaust stories, but a lot of them are on the same angle, which is uprising, heroism, surviving. And we fell in love with the idea of this story just because it's a different kind of angle to deal with the Holocaust, especially from us as third generation of Holocaust, growing up in Israel, hearing all these Holocaust stories from a very early age. So we knew this is something unique, and maybe there is a reason nobody told this story till now. Maybe this is the time to tell these kind of stories.
I mean, do you think it's because culturally we're ready for it? We're ready for that inquiry that was sort of pushed back before, like the Munich response, where people were saying, "Oh, you shouldn't make this story." Mentioning the third generation thing. My parents were born in the early 40s, and so their fundamental memories of meeting their relatives from the ones who got out of Lithuania, Ukraine, and Poland, they are horror stories because they grew up with these awful tales that they couldn't understand as children, right? Like they internalized them as horror stories about not being able to trust anyone in your culture, about how the world was always going to reject you and turn on you. And then my generation grew up almost pushing back against that and understanding identity in a different way, because I'm third generation Canadian in that case, because my grandparents came from Eastern Europe before the war. And so we just have a completely different understanding, having never experienced anything like that. But there is this sense now that the clock has rolled forward enough, and maybe it's because all the survivors are finally, silent is a terrible word to use, but lifespan factors in, right? So if the original survivors
there is a technical
are going,
reason. Right. First of all, they're going, unfortunately. Second of all, there's another technical reason that they didn't talk about it for tens of years. The original Avengers who took part in Plan A, Plan B, they didn't talk about these operations. And if they did it anonymously or without showing their faces. And only in last years, some of them started to talk more openly about this operation. And for us, we did the research for this movie, and we talked to the original Avengers, and we from the Jewish Brigade, which were soldiers. They didn't participate; they weren't in the Holocaust, of course, and the Avengers themselves. And it was fascinating to hear these conversations, to see how their mind worked and what went through their mind at that time, and to judge it not in today's perspective, but in their perspective in 1945, 1946.
Yeah. Well, and how did you find out about the story? Where did it start for you?
Well, it was, it started as a very small film because a friend of ours told us his family secret about his grandfather, that just before he passed away, he told them that after the war, he went back to his childhood home and he took revenge and killed the man who snitched about his family to the Nazis or something like that. And we said, wow, that can be really contained, small, intense family drama about revenge. This is how we wanted to start this project. But then we started, researching, investigating, and I can say it was, using Google, just the first thing I was writing Jewish revenge. And then I started reading about Plan A. And it blew our mind because we never heard about the story about Jews trying to kill 6 million Germans right after the war. We never learned this story at school. We never heard about it. There were no TV shows about it, nothing. So I couldn't believe reading it, just a very small phrase about it. And then we started researching and going deeper and deeper to the subject. We connected to Professor Dina Porat, who was writing a book about the subject. And then we started meeting the survivors, the Avengers that were still alive at that time. And it really, we went deeper and deeper to the story, and it blew our mind. And we decided we want to make a film about this because but a lot of our friends, when we pitched this idea to them, or family members, and they say, why do you want to tell this story? So many people want to keep this story hidden or quiet down, for several reasons. So we felt the weight on our shoulder, writing the script, directing the film. It's an explosive. It's very delicate, because this group, they were the minority, the exception. We are putting a light on a very small group of people who try to take revenge. And the majority, most of the Holocaust survivors did not take revenge, went on with their lives or didn't. But this exceptional group really fascinated us. And I think from the exceptional group, we can learn about all the other survivors who didn't take revenge.
Yeah, I mean, it really does sort of draw the line between the larger cultural stereotype of Jews as intellectuals and passive. Like we're more likely to argue about stuff than actually do anything,
right?
Which is sort of goes out to the liberals and progressives and democracy in general. But the idea that if you survive a death camp, you're probably going to be pissed off about it. I think there's something there. There's something that, and it comes up in the film where characters ask Max straight up, like, why didn't you do something? And he can't answer. Right. And it's not just that they don't understand how it was for him, but he can't understand either. Like he just, he wants to direct it into something. And that's really, like, that's dramatic. That's very compelling. That's Hamlet, right? I mean, that's the idea.
Exactly.
And I had just seen Deal, I guess one of the last things before lockdown would have been A Hidden Life. I saw it at TIFF with a friend of mine, and we were so taken by him. And that's, again, the study in passivity. And he can do that. He can be still and have so much going on inside of him.
He's an amazing.
We were really blessed to have him to accept this role. We couldn't ask for a better actor for this role, and it was he took it so seriously, and we gave him a bunch of books that they just dive into it, read everything.
He knew about the subject more than us. He always he was a real encyclopedia about the subject. He knew so much coming to this project. He has really interesting acting methods. He's giving everything he has on the first take, and it took us a while to understand that, because usually when we are working with actors, they just want another take and another take because they're just getting warmer and warmer from each take. But August is just the opposite. Like he explodes on the first take, and then another one, and then on the third one is empty. And it took us a while to understand how to work with him and to get the maximum out of him, because he's really a true talent.
God, and it is such a volatile performance too. Like he is in it. Those veins in his head are not just inflating themselves. It's really quite something.
Yeah.
So usually the podcast wraps up by asking how the film has influenced your own work, but I think we kind of covered it. The sense that Nolan is doing the thing that you are still chasing, right? Like this conceptual scale and the staggering imagery. How have you had the chance to come up with anything like that? I was trying to think of the closest I can think of is the scene with the bag is basically.
Yeah.
Right. I know what you're. Yeah. It's just, yeah.
So you've sort of nodded in that direction. I think I can say that.
First of all, me and Yoav like to deal with the darker stuff, dark materials. And more intense. We love mythologies, and we love the dark side of human nature. I think this is something that really interests us, even if it's the Golem or a horror movie, or if it's a true story like Plan A. But we always like the extreme, the more hardcore stuff, and more the cinema that makes you think and make you feel without, with all the less natural, with all the manipulation a director can make on audience. If it's music, if it's sound design, it's all that. We love these tools, not the natural, hyper realistic kind of cinema. That's less us, in a way. So of course we can relate to Nolan's movie on that way.
The poetry of the unreal, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My thanks to the Paz brothers, whose new thriller Plan A opens the Toronto Jewish Film Festival this Thursday, June 9th at 8 p.m. at the Hot Docs Ted Rogers Cinema. If you can't make the screening, it'll be available to stream in the festival's virtual cinema at tjff.com from June 16th to the 26th. Thanks also to Winnie Wong. She knows what she did. You can find Yoav and Doron on Twitter at Yoav Paz and Doron Paz, respectively, one word each, and you can find Inception on 4K, Blu-ray, and DVD from Warner Home Entertainment. It's also streaming on Netflix, Crave, and Starz in Canada, and Netflix and HBO Max in the US, and available to rent or buy on most VOD platforms. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Norm Wilner, and you can find this podcast on Twitter at Semcast, S-E-M-Cast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. The first year of the podcast is still available at payhip.com/Semcast for just $20. That's the first 52 episodes of Someone Else's Movie, 46 of which aren't currently available anywhere else. And check out my newsletter, Shiny Things, at shiny-things.ghost.io. I think you'll like it. Our theme song is by The Last Year. If you enjoy it or the show in general, please say so. Leave a review wherever you've been listening. Every little bit helps. It truly does. And check out the other shows on the Frequency Podcast Network while you're there. Stay safe, watch movies, wear a mask if you go out, get your booster when you can. I'll see you next time.